The small town of Blackwood was known for its tight-knit community and peaceful way of life. But that all changed when strange things started happening in the surrounding forest. People would go missing without a trace, and those who dared to venture into the woods would return with tales of terror. Samantha was a young journalist, determined to uncover the truth about what was happening in Blackwood. She had heard about the mysterious disappearances and the local legend of a dark entity that lived in the forest. Despite the warnings from the town's residents, Samantha set out to investigate. She arrived in Blackwood and immediately began her investigation. She spoke to several people who claimed to have seen strange things in the forest, including a figure shrouded in darkness. But no one was willing to speak on the record, as they were all too afraid of what might happen if they crossed the entity. Samantha was determined to get to the bottom of the mystery and headed into the forest. She followed a well-worn path, her heart pounding in her chest as she made her way deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker and the light faded, until she found herself in complete darkness. Suddenly, she heard a twig snap behind her. She spun around, but there was nothing there. She continued on, her nerves on edge, until she came across a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated cabin. It was clear that no one had lived there for years, but there was something about the cabin that drew Samantha in. She approached the cabin, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached for the doorknob, the door suddenly creaked open on its own. Samantha hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity got the better of her and she stepped inside. The inside of the cabin was dark and musty, with cobwebs covering the walls and furniture. But as Samantha's eyes adjusted to the darkness, she noticed something even stranger. On the wall, there was a strange symbol that she couldn't identify. It was like nothing she had ever seen before, and she couldn't help but feel that it was important. Suddenly, she heard a faint whisper in her ear. She spun around, but there was no one there. The whisper grew louder, until it was a piercing scream. Samantha backed away, her heart pounding in her chest, until she stumbled and fell. When she got up, she found herself in a different room. It was dark and musty, with a single candle flickering in the center of the room. There was a figure standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness. Samantha tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself to be a woman. Her skin was pale and her eyes were dark and soulless. She whispered something that Samantha couldn't understand, but it was clear that she meant her harm. Samantha woke up in a hospital bed, with no memory of how she got there. She was told that she had been found in the forest, unconscious and near death. The doctors were baffled by her condition, as there were no physical injuries. Despite her near-death experience, Samantha was more determined than ever to uncover the truth about what happened in the forest. She spoke to the residents of Blackwood, trying to find anyone who would talk about the entity that lived in the woods. But no one was willing to speak to her. One night, as she was working late in her hotel room, she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was face to face with the woman from the cabin. Samantha's heart raced as the woman stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. The woman's eyes were dark and filled with a strange light. She whispered in a voice that chilled Samantha to the bone, "You should not have come here. You should not have disturbed what lies in the forest." Samantha tried to run, but she was frozen in place, unable to move. The woman approached her, her hand reaching out to touch Samantha's forehead. And then, everything went black. When Samantha woke up, she was back in the forest. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across the clearing. She remembered nothing of what had happened the night before, but she felt a strange urge to return to the cabin. She made her way back to the cabin, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached, she could hear whispers and footsteps coming from inside. She pushed open the door, her heart racing as she stepped inside. The inside of the cabin was different than it had been before. The walls were covered in strange symbols and the air was thick with the smell of decay. The whispers grew louder, until they were a chorus of voices that filled the room. And then, she saw it. In the center of the room, there was a dark figure, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself to be the entity that lived in the forest. The entity whispered, its voice filled with malice, "You should not have come here. You have disturbed the balance and now, you must pay the price." Samantha tried to run, but she was frozen in place, unable to move. The entity approached her, its hand reaching out to touch her forehead. And then, everything went black. When Samantha woke up, she was back in her hotel room. It was like nothing had happened. But she could never shake the feeling that something had changed inside of her. She never returned to Blackwood, but she never forgot what she had seen in the forest. And she knew that the entity was still out there, waiting for its next victim.